Hi, welcome to LDS Unmarried Life, a podcast for single members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who find themselves that way either because they're divorced, widowed, or not yet married. There is no affiliation with the church. If you're watching on YouTube, you see that I'm also recording this on video. This podcast can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio. And if you haven't done it already, please subscribe on anettalks.com. That's another place you can find this, and on YouTube. And you can also find me on Facebook. And before I get started with the topic, I just want to remind you that there is a book available called LDS Dating After Divorce, an LDS Survival Guide. It's by Steve Smith and myself, and you can find this on anettalks.com as well. And I think the name kind of speaks for itself. All right. So this podcast is a product of personal experience and a quest to answer a question about whether or not you can love someone even when you hate their politics. And I tried to get an answer to this question on the podcast about dating someone who's very different than yourself or opposites attracting. And so I was at the library the other day and I was just strolling by some books and I found this book called I Love You, But I Hate Your Politics. And I thought, oh, perfect. Usually we don't encounter this problem too much as members of the church because most members are of the same general political persuasion. Most of us are conservative to some degree or another, or maybe a libertarian. But not too many liberals or Democrats. And so it's not something that I really gave a lot of thought to until I met someone who's got some liberal viewpoints and we started dating. But the question's been, in the back of my mind for a while now. Can I really have a good, successful dating relationship with someone who's not in lockstep with me politically? And, when you write down all the things that you want to have in a spouse when you're out there in the dating world, that's not even something that I put on my list because it just didn't occur to me I would find someone who wasn't. But here it is. I'm in that situation. But also, more importantly, I've been thinking for a while about the state of the country and how polarized it's become politically. And I hate it. And I don't think it's going to do any good to this country to stay in that state. So as I was researching and thinking about this, I was thinking about the country at large at the same time, because we definitely need a change. I don't think it's healthy to have the country in two different camps that are so far apart that they don't even want to talk anymore. And there's all sorts of ad hominem attacks where people are calling each other racists or haters or stupid or anything like that. I don't think that helps advance anything in this country at all. And so I want to talk about trying to have personal relationships with people of different political persuasions, as well as the country trying to find more common ground. So, and just so you know, if you're a regular listener, this podcast, which is geared towards single members of the church, I am going to be eventually, it's slowly phasing out. I'm hoping somebody else will pick it up. I'm talking to a few friends that are interested in keeping this going, and I'll help them get it started if they want to. But the reason I got into podcasting originally was so that I could do what I'm planning on doing next, which is starting a second podcast. And right now I'm thinking I'm going to call it Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness. And so obviously from the sound of it, it's going to be somewhat political, and but I don't want to limit it to that. I want it to be open to whatever I want to talk about. So life being the operative word, as in I still want to talk about being single. I still want to talk about parenting. I still want to talk about the culture. I also want to talk about movies and music and anything really. So, but as part of that podcast, I would like to have an episode, a recurring episode. It will probably start out monthly and then maybe become more frequent if I can get enough participants and enough time to do it. But I'm going to start doing an episode called Civil Discourse. And what I want to do is have at least two different opinions, maybe even three, differing political opinions about an issue. Let's say immigration. That seems to be really contentious right now, where I have a liberal and a conservative and maybe a libertarian, or maybe even a few libertarians that argue both sides because they can do that. But I want to have a discussion with a few individuals where I moderate, and it's a discussion. It's not a debate, it's not an argument, and no one's trying to win. The whole point of it is going to be, well, I have a couple of objectives. One is to show the country that it can be done, that people can sit down and talk to each other in an open, honest, friendly, hopefully even funny and entertaining way about something that's very important to them. And that they can do it where they openly share and then respectfully listen to the other viewpoint. And hopefully everyone comes away from it having learned about the issue from both sides or three sides, and also feeling better about being in this country and being able to accept an opposing viewpoint without thinking the other person is just terrible. I mean, you can think someone's wrong without thinking they're a bad person. So I don't think that anyone's going to go listen to the show and change their opinion, although it's possible, but they're going to come away learning about the issue and feeling better about the discourse in this country. So those are my goals, to educate and hopefully entertain at the same time, but also to ease the tension in this country, because I think that we can do that. You know, this extreme polarization is a recent thing, and I'm going to get into a little bit more of that as I do this podcast, why I think it's become more polarized recently. But you know, 50 years ago, it wasn't a big deal if you heard that a Republican and a Democrat were married. It was like, you know, so what? Big deal. They just didn't talk politics, or, you know, they didn't talk very often. But that's not the case much anymore. And in this book, which I've neglected to mention the author, her name is Jeannie Safer. She actually comes from a place of expertise in that, for one thing, she's an analyst, she's a PhD, and she's a relationship therapist, but also she's been married to a man of opposing political ideology for 39 years. And they've done it very successfully. And he actually writes for, I think it's Weekly Standard. And so in her practice, she's seen a lot of people come in who are married or have close friends or siblings that they are constantly arguing with about politics. And that's what the book is geared towards. None of us are probably in that situation. I mean, I'm not there. I don't argue with my boyfriend. We don't really talk about it much. We talk about it some, but I don't think either one of us really wants to argue, maybe because it's still kind of a new relationship, so we don't have really super strong feelings yet. But some of the concepts in here help explain why people have so much difficulty in those relationships, not just romantic relationships, but being parent, child, siblings, or good friends, and what we can do to change that. And the question, can I love you when I hate your politics, is yes. And so I want to talk a little bit about why this sometimes happens and how we can be in these relationships and heal them. If you're in one that's gone bad, either with someone you're dating, or if you happen to be married listening to this podcast, thank you for listening. Or if you have a sibling or a parent that you're not getting along with because of this, or, you know, in the future, you may end up meeting someone that you want to be friends with or date that is of opposing ideology. Hopefully you'll take something away from this, but also I want you to go away thinking about, are you contributing to the overall rancor in the country? So getting started. So a few interesting things from her book. what I thought was really interesting is she talks about the fact that a lot of times in these relationships where they're very heated, and the arguments are constantly happening, it's not about politics. It's about some underlying relationship issue. Um, for example, in a parent-child relationship, the parent, or it's usually the child that's trying to convert the parent or change the parent over to a different, to come around to their way of thinking, their party or their ideology. And then the parent resents if their child does not align with what they were raised with. So it's not as much about what the actual underlying issues of politics, it's more about the person feeling betrayed and like they're not, this person should be more like them. That actually is a lot of what it comes down to. One of the biggest things is that we tend to want someone who's just like us. It's funny, I even actually read another book recently where the author said he thinks that people get together with people that look like them. He's looked at a lot of couples over the years and he says that they usually look alike. And I thought that was interesting. And so sometimes we're looking for our mirror image and we're uncomfortable with someone who is not our mirror image. And so I think that can be a big part of it. Also, like if you have a sibling that you're arguing politics with, there are probably some sibling rivalry issues, underlying issues from your relationship in childhood that you're working out, and that politics are just sort of the vehicle that you're using to work out those issues. Maybe you never felt respected by this sib, and so you're going to constantly argue with them, hoping that they'll come around to your viewpoint. And then you'll feel respected and you'll feel heard. It's another thing is people don't tend to feel heard, and so they pick something that they feel strongly about. And politics is easy to feel strongly about today, and then they'll use that to argue, hoping that they'll win and eventually feel heard or feel accepted, or feel like they're on the same page with that person. And so she says that's a big part of it. I also think that for some people like myself, who are very concerned about the future of this country, it's about that. It's about not wanting the country to go in the wrong direction. And so being very concerned when you hear opposing viewpoints of people who you feel like want to take the country in the exact opposite or wrong direction, and that's scary. And so there's that element of fear as well. She doesn't get into that much, but I think there's a big element of fear of watching the country go in the wrong direction. And I think that's totally legitimate because in this country, we have a very unique country that is based on a democratic, Republican style of government. And for those of us in the church, we know that the government was established for the church to be established here. And so the freedoms that we have are extremely important, not just to running the government, but also to having our religious freedoms and everything else that we enjoy here. And so when we see that threatened, it becomes really important to us. And we know that it's important that we engage politically, that we vote, that we stand up for those issues that are important to us. So all of that is really true and totally valid. And I know that's why a lot of us tend to stand where we're at and not necessarily want to date someone who feels differently than we do, or will we feel threatened by other people that feel differently than we do, because if they win the issue, then we see the country or the city or the state going in the wrong direction. So that's totally valid. However, have you ever convinced anyone to change their mind by arguing with them? I've not. I've never changed my mind. A meme on Facebook posted by someone of the opposite political party has never changed my mind. In fact, it's actually ticked me off. So usually when we are pushing our ideas or philosophies on someone else, we're just going to push them away. So I say we can advocate for our position, we can donate to our causes, we can work for our causes, we can join other groups that are working for our causes. I think we can do all those things and be true to ourselves and be true to our beliefs and not argue with people and not try and change their mind. And in a close relationship, where you're trying to date someone, be married to them, or have them as a close friend, or they're your parents, the last thing you want to do is destroy that connection by trying to change their mind. And that's one of the points that Jeannie makes in this book, is that you're never going to change someone's mind. That's something that you need to accept right away. And so you don't want to do that. And like I mentioned with the podcast I'm going to be doing on civil discourse, our main goal is not to change each other's mind. And I don't think anyone's going to go away from that each episode and say, "Oh, I'm all for the wall now," if they weren't going in. I don't think that's what's going to happen at all. But they're going to come away having listened to the other side, having felt heard, having their side heard, and feeling like that they've educated the public at large. So some of the things that she talks about, and some of the reasons why we get so heated and so entrenched in these ideas. I wanted to read part of what she says in this book about something that she compares. She compares trying to change people's minds politically with chasing after unrequited love. She says most people will admit that in their lifetime they've tried to chase after someone and get them to love them, even though it was pointless. I mean, I know I've had crushes before where I just held on for a really long time, hoping that they would change their mind. Totally pointless. You're never going to get someone to love you. And so she says well, I'll just start quoting here. The identical impulse drives us to try to force people to love us and to agree with us. Both efforts are doomed to fail and leave serious damage in their wake. But in fact, accepting political differences is a much more realistic enterprise than pursuing unresponsive lovers. You actually can have an intimate bond with someone who votes for the other party, and even if you vote identically, there will always be significant areas of disagreement over which you have no control. Limitations in close relationships, including radical differences of opinion about things that matter in politics and in many other arenas, are a fact of life. A fact of life we can live with. Relentless hope is a perversion of authentic hope. We cling to it and pursue it at all costs in order to avoid feeling the pain of disappointment in the other person who, despite our efforts, refuses to change. Pursuing a conversion agenda prevents us from ever seeing that this is an impossible task, and from feeling the full brunt of the recognition of just how limited our sway over other people actually is. Forced political makeovers are no more successful than unilateral romantic makeovers. Ultimately, the problem is not how we vote or which side we support, and the solution does not involve acquiring the debating skills necessary to make arguments compelling enough to convert or crush an intimate opponent. The real issue is our mistaken belief that intimacy is only possible with people who agree with us on everything. This stubborn conviction represents a profound distortion of the essence of love, the hidden fundamentals of human relationships and other discontents, and the nature of hope. In our increasingly narcissistic world, the other person is but an extension of ourselves, politically as well as emotionally, when in fact it is only by accepting and appreciating our very real differences that true intimacy becomes possible. Otherwise, we are just trying to see our own reflections. We cannot bear feeling that we are unable to impose our will, or that the success of our efforts of persuasion, whether in love or politics, is minimal. To do so requires us to accept powerlessness, disappointment, and loneliness, the unavoidable consequences of recognizing the fundamental otherness of an intimate partner. The sobering but ultimately liberating truth is that nobody will ever fully understand or accept the world exactly as we see it, and nobody has to. Foregoing relentless hope allows authentic hope for communication, dialogue, appreciation of another person's qualities to flourish. It underlies precious, loving, mixed political relationships. And in another part of the book, she says that with her and her husband and a lot of other couples who have overcome political differences and have learned how to deal with them actually have all expressed that they've come out much stronger. I feel like the relationship is much stronger because they were able to take those differences and work around them and work through them. And part of that is using humor and respecting the other person, and some other rules that I'm going to read from the book as well. But I see, like I said, I see that extending to the world at large. And I think some of the reason that there is so much polarization right now, or there's a few things. We've got a media that does this nonstop. It's their agenda is to push one side. And so we then insulate ourselves into just watching Fox or just watching MSNBC or whichever news shows or radio shows that we relate to, and we tune out the other side, and so we no longer are even interested. Also, obviously, social media does the same thing. Constant memes, one-sided, very short. Well, we can't have very good discussions when we just post a meme. And then when someone responds to it, it's usually a really short, not terribly thoughtful discussion. It's very easy to be anonymous online and say things that you would never say to someone. It's kind of like in traffic. People cut each other off or flip each other off. You wouldn't do that if you were standing behind someone in line at the grocery store. You wouldn't turn around and flip someone off if you didn't like what they were doing. And online's the same way. People will say, you can say whatever you want. You can be fairly anonymous and say things that are not thoughtful, well thought out, just knee-jerk reaction and emotional. So we're being pretty much set up by media, and then we're giving into that baser instinct on social media. And so those are things. Also, what's interesting is the author is liberal and her husband's conservative, like I mentioned earlier. But one of the things that she brings up and that I'm noticing again and again, she said that actually Trump, I see Trump as a really polarizing figure. It's interesting because you see a lot of Trump fans that are almost rabid, and it's like a hero worship thing. And then on the opposite side, you see a hatred of Trump that's over the top. Like there's not a lot of logic behind either side. It's very interesting. I'm currently registered Republican, although I'm thinking of going independent just because I think the two-party system is not great. But I didn't vote for Trump. I'm not a big Trump fan. I tend to take things one issue at a time. I sometimes like what he does. Sometimes I don't like what he does. And so I don't see him the same way that people on those two sides see him. It's really interesting, though. But for some reason, in the book, it was usually women can't stand him, like to the point of almost hysteria. And then, so the men that support them, the women can't have anything to do with them. They just off the rocker. It's interesting. And I think part of that, again, goes with fear. It seems like sometimes women see Trump as a dangerous person, that he's taking the country in a dangerous place for women. And so I would be curious to hear from any of you out there if you want to give me opinion on what you're seeing with that. But I think there's some underlying fear that is one of the reasons why we're seeing so much polarization. I mean, for sure, we had polarization under Obama as well, but it's definitely increased under Trump. So I'm just speculating on some of the reasons why. But anyway, I think that we can, in our personal relationships and in our relating to just everyone else in the country, we can do something about this to change it. And so the rules that she gives, I'm going to read some of them about how to get along and have civil political discussions. These ones are geared towards personal relationships, and I'm going to talk about which ones I think extend. All right, so she calls this the politics doctor's rules of civility for the politically ill assorted. And she's basing them off of, she used George Washington's rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation as sort of a model, because we need that. It's like the civility has gone out the window, which is dumb. We should be having civil discussions. All right, so she says, number one, Instead of the ever-popular knockdown, drag-out fight, substitute one of the following approaches to political discussion. The horse race, talking about politics as a sport. Who are the players? Who's ahead? Who's behind? That kind of takes it as an other thing. It's not personal. It's them over there. Nuts and bolts, discussing political theories or policy minutia. Which plan will ensure more people? Will Kim disarm? Where does the other person's side believe about X? Or what does the other person's side believe about X? A good choice for policy wonks. And this is one of the things that I'm going to try and do in my podcast, is taking an issue and looking at the nuts and bolts of it. Also, the next one we're going to be using, the scholarly exchange, explaining to one another without ulterior motives where you stand and why, including your ignorance and your doubts, and any common ground you can find. This became my personal favorite once I realized how interesting and informative it could be to talk this way with a thoughtful member of the opposition. So I like that. Just sitting down with someone and saying, well, what can you tell me about this issue? And then listening. And then is there any common ground here? I'm guessing you could find some common ground. When I do my episode, I'm going to ask them at the end, it's kind of like a pop quiz to see if they were listening and to see if they can find common ground. I'm going to ask a liberal, can you tell me the best argument that the conservative made? And then vice versa. Because we can't be so polarized that there's not something that you liked about the other person's argument. Number 2, ask, don't tell. Instead of starting a political discussion armed for bear, try this. Explain to me why your side is taking this position, and then listen to the explanation. This immediately lowers the temperature and shifts the emphasis, but it only works if you really want to know and if your tone is respectful, not accusatory. Number 3, never override, dismiss, or denounce your partner's point of view on any issue. Acknowledge your radical disagreements, but do not thrust them in your partner's face. Number 4, apply a principle that psychotherapists rely on. Never attack the other person's resistance or defenses directly, which only entrenches them. Instead, search sincerely for common ground. Try to empathize and mindfully choose not to speak up when it will lead nowhere. Number 5, remember that your partner has legitimate reasons for his or her positions just as you do. And I think this is really important because, I have a hard time understanding the opposition because I think, how could you possibly believe that? But I have to remember that they believe it for some reason. They grew up with a viewpoint. They grew up with parents. They grew up seeing the world in a certain way. They obviously have a reason for it. And so I need to know what that is. I want to find out what that is. And then I can understand them better as well as their opinion. Eschew any attempt to deride, convert, or override him or her. This sets the tone, breeds empathy, and opens the way for true dialogue and mutual respect, even though you passionately disagree. Acknowledge your own principles, but do not try to persuade your opponent. I think that's probably going to be the biggest takeaway for me from this, is to not try and persuade the other person. Your goal is to go in and listen and understand, and then share. Just do not expect you're going to win this argument or bring them over to your side. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen in your personal relationships, and it's not going to happen online. But maybe you'll come to respect each other more and be willing to at least listen. And then maybe you can have real conversations. All right, number 6, refrain from interrupting, insulting, or otherwise showing contempt for your opponent's views. None of these either charms or persuades anybody ever. Speak for yourself. Never quote outside authorities to bolster or justify your point of view. You're not giving a public lecture or writing a scholarly paper in your bedroom or at the dinner table. This is good in personal discussions. It's going to be different on my podcast. We're going to be bringing in facts and information. We're going to back up our opinions. I don't want people to come in and just give baseless opinions and then base it on emotion or anything like that. So this is good for when you're talking with your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, sibling, parent, whatever. Number 8, if someone asks you what your partner thinks about a burning issue, suggest that the person ask your partner directly. Refuse to either apologize for or be sucked into ganging up on those who matter most to you. Remind yourself regularly that your partner is a separate person whose views are no reflection on you. They are an integral part of him or her. Cultivate the gift of silence. The ability, now that's number 10, cultivate the gift of silence, the ability to hold one's tongue that Washington possessed and that impressed everyone who knew him. This takes lots and lots of practice, but it pays off handsomely. And I think this is great too. There are a lot of times you can just shut up and listen. You do not have to express everything that comes into your head when it comes into your head, especially if you know there's a really hot button issue for the other person. Just listen. Number 11, talk with each other about how you talk to each other. List your hot button issues and discuss how you both want to handle them. Every couple has different needs and solutions. My husband and I opted for avoidance, tempered with abstract discussion on our radioactive topics. Number 12, George Washington said, "We must take men as we find them." And the tolerance he expressed was a cornerstone of American democracy. Make this your mantra. I think it should still be the cornerstone of American democracy. And I'm hoping in some small way to help that happen again. Number 13, differentiate between what you can say to like-minded friends and to your partner. And that's another point she brings up in another part of the book, is that if you feel like you're feeling stifled in your relationship with your partner because you can't say all the things you want to say about your beliefs, go and find people that are like-minded and talk to them about it. Go find other outlets for it. Don't feel stifled. Go take care of that somewhere else. All right, number 14, contribute privately to any cause you believe in without making an announcement to your partner, and suggest that your partner do the same. Number 15, think about what you love and admire and cherish about this person despite his or her politics, and tell him or her. And I think that last one applies to people at large. We can be friends with people of the opposite political persuasion. We're obviously friends with them for a reason. There's something about that person that you admire or respect. And same thing with family members. There's something about your parents that you love and respect, your siblings. And so remind them that you feel that way about them, even though you don't agree politically. So to wrap it up, you can love someone and hate their politics. If you're in a romantic relationship or thinking about it, go pick up this book. If you're like me and you want to see the country be more unified and less polarized, try and follow some of those rules that I just listed out. And also follow my podcast when it comes out. I'm going to be looking for people of opposing viewpoints to be on my podcast. Mostly I'm probably going to use local people here in Denver. But I'm also open to doing like a Zoom meeting, Brady Bunch style, where I have, 3 people on a Zoom meeting. And so I'm open to doing a long distance podcast. And help me try and bring people together. I really know that we can do this. I'm excited about doing this. And I would love to hear from you. So if you can go to AnnetteTalks.com, tell me what you think. If you think this is totally stupid and you can never date someone of the opposing political persuasion, let me know. Or if you're in a relationship with someone of an opposing political persuasion, let me know. And that's pretty much it for today. Find me on AnnetteTalks.com. YouTube, please subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Also, if you really like the podcast and you like what I'm doing, please go to patreon.com/Annette Talks and help contribute to keeping this thing going. And if you are listening to this podcast and there's a topic that you want to see me cover that I haven't covered yet before I phase it out, please let me know. You can let me know at AnnetteTalks.com or email me at Annette@AnnetteTalks.com. Thank you for listening and or watching to LDS Unmarried Life, where LDS singles gather.